All right.
There's something that's been in my purview lately that keeps zinging me, not from an irritation perspective, but almost like a fascination. And it's witnessing an event and then listening to somebody else who was there recall it. And it doesn't resemble what you saw at all.
Welcome to 26 years with my husband.
Well, and it's one of those things where it's like, I used to think that was lying, but it's
just the perspective of the individual and how they filter.
And we always talked about that with Frank's ex-wife, that she could say these things and do these things, and was so convincing because she truly believed it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you look like the crazy one,
right?
Yep. So it just seems to be coming up a lot, and it's like, I used to think that was just lying, but that it doesn't come from that place of deception.
No, it's totally, like, I think about this all the time. I do think about this all the time because I've known a lot of people where, and it used to irritate the crap out of me, but because I'd hear my husband telling somebody a reiteration of something that happened, and it would be a completely different story than my recollection. And I'm like, wait a second.
He wasn't even there.
What?
He wasn't even there, but he's telling it as if he was.
That happened this weekend.
Yeah.
And I was like, I just let it go. You know why? Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I just let it go.
That's so funny. It's like, and I observed the whole thing. I'm just like, it doesn't matter. Does it matter because it's really ego that wants to correct, right?
Right.
And that's what I've been really observant with myself, within myself lately, is when I go to, and I might feel, I think that some people around me might feel like I'm just not engaged in the conversation, but I'm purposely not engaging because it's the ego that wants to say, but really it's this, but really it's that.
Well, or actually this is what happened.
Actually, this is what happened. Right. And that's one of the most common things we do all the time is we're like, no, this is what happened. No, you're not telling it right. Right. And so I've been really conscious of that. And I think a lot of people around me think I'm just not like interested in the conversation, but actually I'm like on the inside, I'm going, why do I have this urge to correct? Like
Yep.
What does it matter? What does it matter?
Right.
Which it's sort of, by the way, it's really funny because I used to be such a big debater about things. And now I'm just sort of like, well, what's the use?
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree, and in that same place. But it seems to be more and more prevalent, and I don't know if it's just a question of, maybe that is their reality, what they're saying.
Well, and think about things like this, and this is what's made me observe this more, is like the more aware and big picture perspective we become, right? The more our perception changes on the little things, right? So we talk all the time like, well, okay, let's look at something simple. So somebody has a car accident, right?
Right.
We were talking about, and it's funny because there have been quite a few of those lately. I've heard from people.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot.
So what most people what many do is they just fall into the place of victimhood, right? Of being in the accident and
right.
The outcome of, and like anything that has to do with the outcome of the accident, right? So then they become distracted by insurance stuff and, having to get a new car or having to get the car fixed. If they have any physical injuries or somebody else does, all of that. And that becomes the end point for where they're focused, right?
Right.
So most will that, because there's a lot of stuff and there's a lot of that chaotic little stuff, and then it's discomfort to the ego because it's change, and it was a traumatic kind of change, right? But yet they don't stop and look at, well, what, like most will not stop and say, well, why did I have the accident to begin with? Not tactically, like not like about the functionality of the car and the functionality of me, but energetically, why did that accident have to show up in my reality? Like for what?
Why did I create that in my reality?
Yeah, why did I create that in my reality? Because I did.
Right.
So when we have shifted our perspective into that, I create my reality, so then why did I put that in my reality? It changes the way we deal with the whole thing. So for example, the practitioner who was telling me that they had totaled their car, I think it was within the past week, and she said, the funny thing was, she goes, all I could think of was, I'm okay, everybody's okay. And she was like, everything's fine. Like, she goes, I got a little upset about it. She goes, but it was really like a very different experience, because it was, a part of me was going, shouldn't I be more upset about this? And another,
Right.
And that's that part of expanding consciousness of going, really, what's this about? And then she started thinking, well, what was this about? What was this created for in my reality? So think about that one thing, right? And see, like, so if you have two different people, so say you had two people in the car, right? And you have one person who was conscious like that and was like, we all walked away, it was all good. I got a better car, I'm getting a better car, da, da, da. And the other person in the car going, oh my God, what a crappy day that was. And I can't believe, like we're in the middle of this and the car got totaled and thank God, like, da, 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 and we could have been so hurt. Like, these are two people that were in the same situation.
Right.
And they have two completely different stories about how or what laid out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So neither one of them is wrong. It's where they are in their consciousness right in that moment.
Yeah.
And so if you think of it from that perspective, as we become more conscious, right, our whole experience changes in everything that we do, right? You see a bee, buzzing around you, and it's like some message to you, or is somebody else sitting next to you is going to swat at it because they're afraid the bee gets
stung.
Yeah, because they don't want to get stung, which, often makes them get stung, it's just that kind of thing. But I think the point is, going to what you're saying, is when we can see things that way and we understand that with a different level of consciousness, we have a completely different experience, right? Then you can start to accept that two people in the same experience are going to have a completely different experience of that, or a completely different truth about it.
Right. Right.
And it doesn't make one wrong and one right. It just makes them where they are in that moment.
Well, and to me, it screams, each person's playing out their own little reality. And so what really is the truth?
Well, isn't truth just a judgment?
Well, and it's in the eye of the beholder.
Right.
Right.
Because truth and lies are a duality-based thing, right?
Right.
Oh, that's going to open up a can of worms. I can feel that.
Well, it goes back to that perspective you were talking about. Like, if you take out the roles, it's, if you take out what the definition of truth, wow, that's a pretty big box to take out.
Well, because we judge so much against it, don't we?
Oh, yeah. Well, and if you look at so much on Facebook about, this is one in just particular, that really keeps coming into my mind that I exposed myself to is a starving horse, for instance, and it's like the anger and the, everything towards the owner. And it's like, clearly there was an agreement with the owner and the horse.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than further where that owner is, you know, how can I help that owner? How can I help, you know, in that circumstance?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're called to action, why would you want to be hurtful versus helpful? And again, it's judgment. But there's so much of that I feel floating by. And it's like, you know, there's so much negativity associated with that. And it just seems counterproductive of where we're trying to get.
It is, because we still focus so much on the negative, right? When we do that. And then we create that truth even more.
Right.
I mean, that's another level of that entirely, because the outrage just creates the reality even more.
Right. And perpetuates and you know. I know I saw something again on Facebook, and I can't even remember who posted it, about, and I think it was an African tribe that's still, you know, it talks about how children are born and they come with a song, and that as they get older, if they do something detrimental to the tribe, then they pull him in the center and everybody sings the song associated with him to bring him back to the synergy of the group.
Right.
Versus punishment, you know, ostracizing, that, all that. And that's, to me, that just feels like more where we need to be.
Totally. Yeah.
But, and I base that more on feeling versus thinking, you know, judgment, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, if, you know, like we talk about separation, it's like, okay, separation is my hand is not part of me.
Right.
And your hand does something that you judge is wrong, so you're going to punch your hand.
Cut it off.
That's right. To me, that's just so funny.
Well, and so like we were talking about offline is something actually that's worthy of bringing up here, because it's happened after the call last week. So there was a lot of discussion throughout the week last week about the dark side of blank. First, it started out with the dark side of money and blah, blah, blah. And then the discussion evolved to, and this was with Jen Koenig, that I had this discussion, and then you and I talked about it, and then she's been all these, and we had it in Share Friday night, whatever. But part of it is, whenever we say the dark side of anything, that's a judgment, right? And that's pushing it out as separate. Same thing with the light side. Like we were saying sometime in the past couple of weeks, it's like people are so stuck on, oh, I'm a light worker, but nobody wants to say I'm a dark worker, you know?
Right.
And the key is for us, so in the conversation, what this all started with was, you know, because there's a lot of us who do this spiritual and consciousness work, and then there's stuff around money that comes up, and then there's like stuff around being a witch, you know, like there's all these things, right? There's stuff about, well, money's dirty and it's evil, or it comes from evil activity, or the same money that could be in your hands could have been, you know, for slavery in some place in the world, and, you know, like all this kind of stuff, right? And there's all this judgment. And if we have, like, you know, it's interesting because many times like some of the first things that happen as we become more conscious, some of the first things are that almost like the judgments become exacerbated, and they become even bigger and into righteousness, until you realize that righteousness is simply ego, right? And, you know, it's like the age-old argument on vegetarian or vegan, or, you know, omnivore or carnivore. And it's interesting because that gets so many people up in arms, so many, right? And they attach it to spirituality. And what's interesting is, I've had this conversation too many times, so I don't even like get worked up about it. And I'm like, well, your choice is your choice. My choice is mine. And nobody's is wrong.
Right.
And if somebody continues to like push the, oh, well, you know, how could you, you know, like, how could you eat something that was alive? And I'm like, but so are plants are alive. Plants are just as conscious as animals.
Right.
So where do we like, and then when we say, well, no, there's a line, there's no line. The line is it's ego, and it's how we compartmentalize. It's how we categorize. So either everything has consciousness or nothing does. You know, it's like in spirituality, we say either you allow it all to be possibility, or you cannot allow anything to be possibility. Bless you. See, it must be true. So it's like, well, if, and what I always tell people is this, like, what's really more important than the whole judgment about food and whatever is do what's right for your body and how your body reacts to it.
Well, and you know, if you really want to take it down that path, nobody should eat anything because we really don't need it. It's just an illusion. Right.
Well, that's what we're working toward, right? Or that's what we're flowing toward, let's just say.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, so the thing is, if you have two people, say you have somebody who's like a staunch, like carnivore, and somebody who's a staunch vegan, you could have them debating till they turn blue in the face, and nobody's going to probably give an inch.
Right.
So who's right?
Neither one.
Well, both of them.
Actually, there right doesn't exist.
Right. So it just is. It's where they are. Right. So it's.
And look at how many times we use right in that conversation.
Yeah. And it's funny because we have so embedded. It's so embedded in every conversation. You know, when we say we're in the car, oh no, that's a better way, right? Or oh, this is the right way to go, or you should have turned in here, or you know, whatever. And we don't even listen to ourselves and how embedded that is. But so, you know, one of the things that has been a joke for 26 years I've been with my husband is he and I do directions very differently.
Oh yeah.
So the funniest thing is, if you put him in a car, right, and tell him to go someplace, he has his own way of how he decides he's going, which is fine. And then he tries to explain it to somebody, though, and it gets all muddled up, and people always get lost. And I'm always like, okay, I'm very, what are those, like, point oriented? I'll be like, okay, you go to this, and then you make a right, or you go to you know, like, or
right.
And it tends to be much more direct. But it's so funny because I used to laugh because you know, Scott would be able to talk like he knew what he's talking about, and in his mind he could see the path, like see the way to go there, right? But doesn't realize that the communication, because it'd be like, well, you go in there about 5 minutes, and then you turn at this street, and I think there's something here, you know, like things like that, right? And people would get lost. It would sound like he knew what he was talking about, and he would speak with authority, so they would listen to him, right? And it became such a joke that I even bought him a T-shirt that said, I might not know I don't know what I'm talking about, but I can sure sound like it. Right? Oh, yeah. And it was funny because I would give my version of directions, and I would get blown off because he would sound like he knew what he was talking about. You know, I think it's still that that male thing in our society. And then when I'd end up getting a phone call from somebody going, now what was your directions again? Because I can't seem to find it. And I'd be like, And it's not that one was right or one was wrong, because like I said, it's just the way it is played out, right? And so sometimes one is more clear than another, sometimes, but then it could be that somebody else takes the directions and it's just fine for them.
Right.
Right? Because they think in the same way or have the same pattern. So really, in reality, it doesn't make one right or one wrong. It just makes it different.
Right.
Like I said, he'd get there and I'd get there. We knew how to get there. It'd just be a very different way of explaining it to somebody. Right.
Well, and you know, maybe his journey needed to incorporate things that yours didn't.
That's right. Noticing that little wheelbarrow sitting in the front yard that's right by that corner that I would have no idea to look for, you know, but, you know, and I it's funny because I even find sometimes it irritates me, like things like that. And I'll just, have to observe that within myself. Like, why am I irritated? Right? Why does this irritate me? Just laugh. Just flow with it. Right? And it's like saying what we're saying was two different people have the same experience, but have very different stories about what happened in that experience.
Yep.
And that doesn't make one right or one wrong. It just makes them right for their own filter.
Yeah. Or whatever glasses they happen to be looking at things through.
Because you could have two different, so like here, let's even talk about something from the spiritual thing, like somebody who has a really, okay, so the more we do, the more conscious we become, the more easy it is for us to create, the more magical things become, right? Miraculous, that many would call it. And so within the spiritual community, we see that and we laugh about it and we know it's really cool. And we're like, okay, so how to shift that for even more? And then those who might be stuck in old, or not stuck, I don't want to say stuck, still living in the filter of old structure, right, of beliefs, could think that's a heretic, right, or witch-like,
right,
or satanic, or with the devil, and banish and want to hurt somebody who's doing that because they feel like that they're doing something that's blasphemous, right? Versus from our perspective, who are, from those of us who are in the middle of doing stuff like this, it's all, well, this is all love and divine and unity based and whatever. And it's about as, it becomes more and more exalted, but then if somebody's looking at us from a different filter, it could call it completely evil.
Right.
And nobody's right and nobody's wrong about it. It's just our own experience of it.
Yeah, which brings me back to that phrase, there is no right, there is no wrong, there's just power. And I think that's where we separate and disempower ourselves, is in that judgment.
Disempower ourselves about power.
Right.
Yeah. And with that comes this judgment of what's good power and bad power, right?
Right.
So that's where the conversation went last week. We were talking about, well, one person's bad is another person's good. So what are we to say? Like, you're never going to find something that is so pristine. It just won't, it just goes.
Except wholeness, which is everything.
Right. Which is everything is everything. Everything is divine. Right. And so it's interesting. So the question has been, what do we do with that? Right.
Well, and how do you operate from there?
Well, yeah, because right away the ego goes, what?
Well, wait a minute.
Right. What about stealing and murdering and da-da-da? There's all, because we have all this stuff ingrained in our head and going, well, but here's the thing. So I always say this to people. I'm like, so if somebody murdered somebody just because they crossed their path and they were really irritated one day, and then somebody murdered somebody because, say, self-defense, somebody was killing their child or raping their child or whatever, or themselves. So then murder was right in one situation and wrong in another. And then people would say, well, that would be the reason for it. And it's like, except reason is filter and ego, right?
Right.
And even still, you'd have the same disparity of opinion across the board, right? So it's like, so that's the hardest thing for us to stomach, the ego, because the ego wants to say, no, there is a right and wrong. There's got to be.
There has to be some definitive disposition in there.
Mm-hmm.
And the only definitive disposition is that everything's perfect and that's all.
Right. Which does come back to a lot of thoughts having to do with even any of those in history that we have in history that have come into what we call remembrance or enlightenment, or Christ in consciousness. and in the way that we have perceived it. But really, they've all said the same thing, which is that everything is part of God. Everything is divine, or if you want to call it God or divine or the whole or source or whatever.
Right.
And that from there is unconditional love, because that's unconditional acceptance for all parts of the whole. And when, I guess that's the hardest part for our ego to accept, right? Because it wants to say, well, I want to save my chit for one day, to have this, not to say, no, this is wrong or this is bad.
Right.
And then of course the ego says, well, then how do we even function if we're still in duality-based reality that's based on propulsion, right? Based on good and bad or opposites and all that kind of stuff. How do we even function that way? And that's where we feel like we fall into the black hole.
Well, especially because you get to the point, well, what's the point of functioning?
Right. Right. What's the point? Well, then you start saying, well, then what is the point? You know, what's the point? And that's where I find, and I think that's where I find myself in those discussions when, like, part of me, like, the way that I used to be or have been, you know, is like wanting to get engaged in this conversation, this debate. And then there's an even louder voice that gets louder and louder as I go, going, what's the point?
Right. Yeah. And where I end up when I start doing that mental exercise is I think I'm just going to focus on what brings me joy. From that place of unconditional love, and that everything else falls into line, which goes back to that trusting the universe to fill in the details, which that's from almost a year ago.
Yeah.
If not more.
Well, but we've also talked about that now too. Well, endpoint creation, right?
Right.
Endpoint creation is just knowing it's created and letting the universe take care of all the details to backtrack and make sure that's filled in.
Right.
And I've had questions about endpoint creation. I had somebody say, well, does that mean there's an endpoint, but doesn't that, like, you know, doesn't that imply that's linear? And I'm like, yes and no. I'm like, we use the term endpoint creation because it's a place for our mind. Again, all of this stuff is the alignment of mind, body, and spirit, you know, thought, deed, and everything to this remembrance. And in the beginning, we can call it endpoint creation because the mind can hold that and say, okay, so endpoint creation is it's done, right?
Right.
There's no path to get there, means implying linear, right? So it's just done, but it is taking away linearity by saying it's already created. The universe is going to just bring it all together. So,
yes, that's the way I see it.
So that's a big shift for us, because then, and allowing, it's easiest for us to be able to do that when we can not think we need to do all these steps along the way and figure out how to get there. All right, I'm going to put this on pause because I think I'm going to take a bio break. So the other thing that occurs to me is the challenge that we have is when we start to grasp onto these different kind of ways of existing, then the ego starts using them as excuses too, and that's the tricky part.
Yeah. I can see that.
Well, I don't have to change anything. I don't have to do anything because it's all perfect.
It's all perfect, right.
And then, you know, that raises the question is, because I've had the question is, well, how do you know? And I'm not sure I have clarity on how to answer the question. I would always say, as you said before, is focusing on what allows joy, right?
Right.
And I wouldn't say brings you joy, because we always say that what brings me happiness, and that's another thing I've sort of caught myself with lately. Nothing brings us happiness. We allow ourselves happiness. What allows us to express our happiness and joy? That's a different question, you know?
Well, right, and it's already there. It's
how to express it.
What are we allowing to cloud our view of that, or to stand in the way, or that we value more?
And really,
happiness.
And the reason being is the happier and more bliss we allow ourselves, the more we are aligned in unity and unconditional love, because it raises our vibration. We're naturally in that place of centeredness and just love. You know, it's funny. It's really funny because I see so much around us all the time on how much culturally and just as a human condition itself, going back to talking about like not needing to be in a human role, right?
Right.
But the idea of someone saying, so this is what came to mind. So Saturday night we had barbecue in my neighborhood, right? And this is funny because like we've lived here for 21 years and we used to have like a yearly barbecue. We stopped. We didn't have them for maybe 6 years or so. And then we had one last year. We just had one this weekend. And like people are like, we're all connecting more. Like this is like a little cul-de-sac than we have for a long time. But so we're sitting around talking. And so that we also had some people from outside the cul-de-sac that were still like on the other side of people's properties that they were friends with, neighbors over there. So there were some people I was talking to, and I was asked what I did. And I was sort of explaining it, you know, what I do for a living. Because I do have a chiropractor now in our neighborhood. She just opened an office, and I was talking about how I used to have an office in a chiropractor's office for like 3 years. And she's like, really? And she already knows what I do because we're Facebook friends, whatever. And I could tell she was like wondering if I was interested because she just got like this bigger office and is looking to rent out some of the rooms. But I was just like, yeah. And then I brought my business bag in my house and I actually really like it. Yes. So anyway, so then this other woman said, well, what do you do? And so I started talking about energy work. I talked about spiritual counseling and teaching people and doing retreats and whatever. And I got to talking about Mount Shasta, you know, and I was talking about going to Peru shortly after and all that kind of stuff. And she's like, and she goes, you need an assistant? I said, I actually just hired an assistant. But what's really funny is when I talk to people about what I do, right? Because I love it so much, people get excited just talking to me about it. And they're like, God, I wish I could just do something like that. Right. Wow. And I hear that all the time. Oh, well, or I'll hear comments on, well, not all of us have work that's play. Right. Like it's almost like a bad thing. You know what I'm saying? And culturally, we still haven't connected that our power comes from our bliss and our happiness, not from suffering and duty. Right. And so we feel guilty. Often we feel guilty because we're having too much fun. We feel guilty because, you know, our job is too easy for us, that we love it so much that it doesn't feel like a job. Right. Mm-hmm. I always say all the time, I am so blessed and excited that I get paid for what I do because it doesn't feel like work to me. Yeah. You know, and what I say to people all the time, like when I talk about, because we have so much embedded, and I say to people, like, we talk about like career changes and life changes and all that kind of stuff, and even talking to people like, oh no, I've always done this and I really like what I do. And I'm always like, well, listen to yourself. You say you really like what you do, but you don't say, I love this. This is like the be all end all to me. And usually the litmus test that I give people is, if you won, I don't know, if you came into $100 billion or whatever, just like create some crazy amount of money, like,
would you keep doing what you're doing?
Would you still do what you're doing? And like 90% of people you ask say no. Nope, I'd stop.
Or what's the first thing you would do? Well, I'd quit my job.
Right. And so I'm like, that's usually the litmus test, because if you really truly love something, you're going to do it, whether you are making, you know, like doing it as a living or need it for your sustenance or not.
Right.
Even better if like you or in a situation where you have to, you know, work for sustenance, well, then to be doing something that you love so much because it's easy and play, and then you enjoy yourself, and then it's a very easy way to do it, right? So how do we even get into this? There was a reason. Oh, about the ego going, well, if there's no right and wrong, if there's no good and bad, if there's no reason to do anything and everything's perfect, then why do anything, right?
Uh-huh.
And I always say, well, my whole thing is, well, really, part of what we're doing is learning through separation to remember our wholeness, right? That's we separate to remember. I don't know. And I just always say, well, follow whatever allows you to embody your bliss, whatever that is. And bliss meaning everything is awesome and amazing, and I don't have to work at it because it's easy to me. Because I would do it no matter what.
Right.
How many people really do that? Very few.
I would say very small percentage.
Yeah. And many people like will say, oh, I can't do that until I like, you know, that must be nice because I've got to pay the bills. I'm like, but you could pay the bills and do that. Like you could find a way so that the bills could be paid while you're doing that.
Well, and then another challenge lies in what brings me the bliss.
Right. Well, and that goes into changing the term of nothing brings me bliss or happiness, but something allows me to express my bliss, right? You know,
right.
You know, right. Because if we focus on, it goes down to the why questions, right? Why do I care? Why do I care questions? I think we could probably do that for happiness too, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people say, well, because you're right, because this sort of gets very hidden. It's very embedded. Oh, wow. This is just like unraveling such a Pandora's box here.
Yeah, I'm feeling that.
What if we did, I don't know, help me think of something.
Ooh.
Well, there's somebody I knew, here's a good one, who really, really enjoyed cooking, right? Like to a point where she actually would, like she created a business out of her, like in baking was just her thing. And everything she baked was just golden, right? And the funniest thing was she really enjoyed it because she really put her heart and soul into it, right?
Yeah.
And and you know what she would say is she would like making people happy. Okay, but that's an externalization.
Right.
Except the fact that she really did these amazing creations. She had the creativity and the artistry to bake this amazing stuff, right? And when she started doing it as a business, she was never happier than when I saw her, you know, like doing it. And then, you know, like, and she did it in a wholesome way and got picked up at Whole Foods and a whole bunch of other places, you know, and in a way, so like when it becomes that depersonalized, it's like, well, she liked the idea of bringing something that was just so love-based, right, to someone in a way that was comforting and joyous and whatever, right? And because we talked about this, I said, so really, do you do it just to make somebody happy, or because you like that, because you can express your joy and your bliss through that creation, which naturally will make other people happy, right? Then she had this really budding, explosive business, and it was going national and everything else. And then she met someone. Well, she had been married and gotten divorced, and that actually carried her all the way through her divorce and everything, that business. And then she met somebody else, and then his dream was to start a farm And so she actually closed the business down so that she could help him 100% of the time. And I was like, well, and he even actually apparently even offered to her, no, like there was this barn on the property that he was going to convert to like a commercial kitchen so she could continue her business. She's like, no, I just want to devote my time to making him happy now.
Ooh, yeah. Well,
and to which what happened is eventually, I mean, and she's still with him, but I think she's had more physical stuff come up, right? Because then it starts getting repressed.
When you were describing her evolution,
mm-hmm.
and what I saw her creations were externalization of her joy and bliss.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like, because I know I felt I was a very good cook for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And it was when my kids were little, and it was, and then something happened, and I can't get anything to come out now. And it's like I lost my joy, the connection to my joy in that.
Mm-hmm.
And so now I just don't. But
see, and you know what's funny is it's been the opposite for me, because when my kids were younger and I cooked, it was always out of got to make sure we have a meal on the table for everybody, right?
Right. And I think that's what pulled me through that time. And it was coming out the other side that I just was like, it never really brought me the joy. But I think that in thinking about it now, that's what doesn't bring me the joy. That it actually did. If that makes any sense.
No, you lost me on that last statement.
Well, it's like, it actually, when I was in the process, I did find some joy, externalization of joy and bliss, and providing that for my family and my children and whatever.
Right. Because then it made you a valuable mother.
And now it's thinking about all of that loses that joy.
Yeah. See, and like I said, it's opposite for me, because I used to do it and it was so much of an obligation. It was good. It was fine. But I never really enjoyed it. And now, because my kids are adults and not around most of the time, it's like if and when I cook, it's out of a place of nourishment and, like freedom to be able to express myself however I want, or to create it however I want. Mm-hmm. And I find that my cooking has gotten a bajillion times better over like the past 5 years because of that, because of the whole
place. Right.
Because it's not cooking for somebody, right?
Right.
It's
not based on anything but your joy.
Yes.
Which I find a lot of things that I've done in the past were for external recognition from someone else or validation or whatever, versus this is just something that I want to create for myself.
Right. And that is where there's the very gray line for so many.
Right.
So when we talk about that, we sort of, wow, we've come around a big circle today.
Well, and it comes back to that your creation is what you externalize based in your joy and bliss. And if you have an egoic sense of joy and bliss, it typically isn't for you.
Right.
Because the ego is based on someone else.
Right. Because a lot of times, so that's some really honest observation of ourselves, right? Which we're not used to doing without judgment, right? Because then you don't want to, because even us saying, well, I feel good when I do this because it makes my kids happy, right? Underneath it, that means because I need somebody else to love me or find me valid as a person to feel like I'm valuable, period, right? So that takes it totally outside of us. Versus when you say, well, I do this because it allows me to infuse my joy and happiness into it. And I know it makes everybody around me happy at the same time because I have so much in there. There's no externalization. It's like, but even if there's nobody else around, I don't care.
It's almost like everybody else is secondary instead of primary.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And by the way, when we do come from that perspective, which is really funny, and it's, I guess, illogical to the mind, right? So when we come to it from that way of coming from us being primary and everybody else being secondary, the funniest thing is typically those who become secondary are far more satisfied with what you are emanating than if you're doing it for them as a primary, because it changes the energy of it entirely.
It really does. And it's given with no expectation.
Yes.
Which is the part that it's that, people never really let go of what they're giving you. There's always something that is expected in return.
Yes. Yes. So when we do it, and we do it freely, because we're doing it from happiness and joy and bliss and self-love and unconditional love and divine awareness and wholeness, and however you want to look at it, then those who are not aligned with that are not probably going to like it, right? Or they're just not going to see it, or they're not going to perceive it. So that's what I always tell people is, like, if we spend our whole lives based on how we think other people are going to think of us, right? How we think other people are going to judge us, we're never going to allow ourselves to find our own bliss. To not find it, but remember it and emanate it. We'll always be in lack in some way because we're dependent on something outside of us. Because it's like we put somebody else first, we put something outside of us first, instead of putting ourselves first. And when we put ourselves first and allow that happiness and bliss, you don't have to worry about anybody else.
Right. It just
and you don't. That's the thing. Then you just come to a place of, I'm just being this blissful supernova of a star, and you can choose to be this too. Like, it sort of helps them to remember the way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm giving you permission to do that for yourself as well, and not, like, think about being a parent. And this is what I tell people all the time, especially women who come in and they're so stuck in the mother role of what they're supposed to be as a mother and what they're supposed to do. And if they do stuff for themselves, they feel guilty because it's abandoning their kids or not being a good mother. And I'm like, so if you and they secretly resent it, and I've seen this so many times, and they start to resent it.
Right.
But they hide it really well. And when they hide it really well, what happens is they get sick. They have physical illness. They have chronic illness. They have chronic headaches. They have allergies. They have all kinds of, chronic stuff. Cancer comes up. And I'm just like, it's so simple. If we just turn all this around, we would get rid of so many of the diseases and chronic ailments that we have, because we would let go of the resentment, because we're doing something as us, as the primary, from a place of love. Like, if my goal becomes 100% to emanate and express and embody the divine bliss and unconditional love that I am, I never show up for anything at less than 100%.
Right.
And it's effortless. And that goes back to, doing something for a living that allows that, because then you just get money for it, and it's like nothing. There's no effort for that.
It's almost like that. We've answered the question of, how do you know?
Yeah.
You're doing something from that, slight egoic perspective, or if it's, if you simply focus, like I experienced bliss in everything. All the things that aren't in line with that will just fall away.
And that's always easy to say, and never quite so easy for us to employ all the time.
Well, and it's a question of it makes you, it allows the opportunity to re-examine everything.
Yes. Absolutely.
But that just feels like so much, I hate to even use the word healthier place to come from, because that's judgment.
Well, it's more of a holy divine place to come from, right? Versus ego. I mean, there's still going to be ego in there, but what we're doing is realign, because the ego is part of the whole too, right?
Right.
It's just not making it primary. It's making it secondary versus primary. Yeah, so I guess that's what we're focusing on today, and our big spark that we came around.
Wow, that was all over the map. But it was good.
It was, absolutely. So I'm going to go to take a bio break again real quick, and then we'll do, I think it's just going to be whatever allows, whatever, so that we align ourselves with that and we exist in that and emanate that all the time.
Right.
Always. And 100% allow ourselves to do that.
And that's the power base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because just think about that. It erases any worry about judgment, about right or wrong, about what others think, whether it's good or bad. Again, because all that's just so egocentric.
Yeah.
I think about that. Because there's just so much that I've been observing. I've been observing that constantly. Watching this show on Netflix called, I don't know, it's like the 72 most dangerous animals of Asia or something, right?
Yeah.
And I enjoy it because I find out about animals that exist here that I didn't even have any consciousness of existing, right?
Right.
But most of the time when they talk about it, so I've been fascinated with it more, not from the fact of drama, which they do a lot of in the show, of course, but from wow, look at how look at the variety of this amazing planet that we've created, right?
And just the ingenuity and creativity, and yeah. I think nature is the best example of there is no right or wrong.
Well, no, right? Who's to judge that? And here's another, I had a personal example of this yesterday. I was gone into my kitchen. I have a big picture window in the kitchen, and the deck is right off there. And I was sitting down and I was eating a sandwich, and I look out the window and there's this big garden spider that has a web off the deck, right? The black and gold orb weavers or whatever.
Right.
Which I think are beautiful. Wicked looking and beautiful at the same time, right? So she had something huge in the middle of her web, and I couldn't see what it was. And Scott was out in the yard, and I was knocking on the window, like, "What is that? What does she have?" Right? And he's like, "Something big." But then I sat back down, and so 2 feet to the right, down toward the corner of the deck, was a smaller one, right? And there's a whole patch of garlic chives there that are in flower right now. So there's a lot of pollinators there. So down by the edge is a smaller web with the smaller spider, a garden spider. And I just happened to look while I'm eating my sandwich, and I look over, and a little wasp fell right into the web, right? And I don't know if you've ever seen a spider when something gets into its web. I mean, they move so fast for spiders that just sit there, right? I'm watching it, and it wraps it up. Before, I swear that wasp even knew what hit it. It was wrapped up and injected probably with whatever it uses, and doing its thing. So then what happens is a part of me wants to judge it and go, ew.
Right.
But I was sitting there and I was like, well, but that's really, I'm sitting here eating my lunch,
and spiders sitting there having their lunch.
And the spiders are having lunch with me. And again, it's that same thing of, vegan, vegetarian, carnivore, right? Why, they are a very powerful part of our food chain on this planet.
Right.
Spiders keep certain populations in check and everything else. And it's
absolutely.
So are they bad or are they good? They just are.
Right.
They're part of the whole interrelation, and they have their own message because we did create them as identities, right? As a singular thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how we sort of look at that from the bigger perspective. There's just so much has been coming to me on this. It's just been incredible. All right, I'm going to put this on pause one more time.
All right.
Okay. All right, so all that. And then
Absolutely.
staying observant to that, being able to live it, allowing ourselves to remember how to, and anything else. Words are not necessary. Let's just go do it. That took a while to get it.
Yeah.
There was a lot of fighting against that.
There was a lot of questions like, but what about, but what about, but what about?
Yeah. Yeah, I was shown a bunch of stuff. And wow, went to some really deep, dark depths there.
Yeah.
And then it sort of came back up, and then I can't even remember at the end because I was watching this whole string of things, and I was like, "Wait, what are we out here doing again?" It was really funny. And I was like, "Why even ask? Why even ask?"
Well, I kept seeing circumstances that, things you'd read or things you don't want to do or whatever, and it's like identifying the pieces and the parts within it that are the joyous pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And that if that's the focus, it almost like is an anchor to pull you through the rest, and it transforms the rest. It was really kind of like a tool, very powerful.
Yeah. Once all the questioning quieted down, it was almost like watching the fabric of everything. Like it was like I could suddenly see all the pieces and parts as they fit together, say, to make the fabric, of
Right.
reality, the multiverse, however we want to put it. And then that's where I sort of got lost, because then I was looking at everything going, oh wow, I can totally see this now. And it was like, but that's how we see it, right? Is that be in that wholeness without judging or deflecting or excluding.
Right.
It was very cool. Oh, let me yawn.
No, I'm yawning.
Well, fabulosity.
Oh.
As always, fabulous week, fabulous discussion.
I know.
Much to chew on and really just to sit in. So
yeah.
We'll see y'all next week. Thanks for joining.